Very good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thanks for being here. I will present the talk I gave on SIGA. It is an international event. So I will show you a little bit about the event. This conference is very important. And then I will reproduce what I've done down there. Okay. First of all, what is SIGA? It's a serious game and applications for health. This is the 14th edition. It's an IEEE event, and it was a very short period of event. So 3 days of conference, so only one session, and most of the papers have been presented in only one space, in auditorium. And we had another opportunity to present the papers as a poster. So we had one oral presentation and 2 other papers presented as posters. As I said, it's a very international event, 38 countries and from 6 continents, and a small one, 37 oral presentations and 40 poster presentations. So it's a most prestigious event on the area of serious games related to the area of health. So we were very honored to have a paper accepted in this conference, and I can tell you that it was my greatest honor to have been invited to this conference. The first time I've been invited to this conference, and I did the opening talk. So Harry, it's my biggest honor so far. Okay, so let's start with the actual presentation. This was not part of the presentation. I'm presenting the conference to you. So the actual presentation, I started telling everybody that we were going to discuss about different perspectives on what is exergaming. And I stand here because of the maneuver. It's not working. It is not working. No, that's okay. That's okay. So my talk is somehow biased by my previous experience on serious games. So what I'm talking about is serious exergames. It's a little bit different from exergaming itself, but I'm adding a little bit on my experience. And I will show some perspectives on definition, on the design, and on the use of exergames. To start off, I have to say that back 22 years ago, I had a motorbike accident, and I tore my rotador ligament. It was very painful. It was very complicated. Then I developed what is called a frozen shoulder. I couldn't move. It was very painful, and I didn't have any movement at all. So after some time, I had to go into surgery. And after the surgery, I had to undergo physiotherapy. And I tell you that physiotherapy is very, very boring. And because of that, I developed some insights. But although it's very boring, it really works. It really works. I'm okay. Don't worry. Okay, I can do all movements now. They don't have much strength, but I can move my shoulder. So during that time, I had my eureka moment. I thought, why not using digital games to help guide rehabilitation exercise? It was about 22 years ago. Unfortunately, I later discovered that back in 1982, Atari had launched a prototype, which was called Puffer, which added a bicycle, stationary bicycle, into a video game. So the great Eureka moment wasn't mine. Someone else had did that before. And I then later discovered that the biking exercise altogether with games became a mainstream kind of proposals for exergames. Many exergames came and were launched afterwards. The Puffer was not an actual product, but in 1983, an actual product was launched, which was the Sun Cone, and many others came before and afterwards. High Cycle by Autodesk and computer training by Racemate. Many products like biking, but biking was not the only kind of exercise added to video games. Back in 1983, Amiga launched a board where you have to stand on top of it, and by standing on top of it, there are 8 sensors. You can transfer your movement back and forth, from left and right, to control the game. So this kind of surface became a mainstream idea, and many surfaces were proposed and launched and sold, like this one, which is a power pad with 16 different positions. In 1987, Atari launched another kind of surface, a very, very cheap one, which became very famous because of the price. It was affordable to everyone. And many games were attached to this kind of surface, this kind of mat. A very simple one with only 4 positions, 5 positions. Later, 1998, the Dance Dance Revolution, launched by Konami, became a very, very huge success. We had this in the shopping some time ago. This game is a very important example of what is possible with exergames. I will talk about a little bit more of this game and this interface later on. But to follow the idea, then we had many different devices. Some of them were launched to identify the position of your fingers, your hands, and all together with Nintendo 1989. Then iToy, which is a kind of visual interface, a 2D one. iToy was the very first commercial console with 2D interface back in 2002. Back in 2006, it came with a lot of bundles, a lot of props, a lot of extra devices. So you attach to the device and then you play in a more intuitive way. Very important. Then Move. Move was the first real 3D game using visual interface for PlayStation 3 back in 2009. And the last one I showed is Kinect, which is became the very first popular 3D game and 3D console, actual 3D in terms of capturing movement of the player. It was launched 2010 and stopped producing back in 2017. Then Microsoft launched the second version, which was much more expensive, and it fell off of the mainstream consumer intentions. I'm not sure if you know about that, but Kinect was formerly a Brazilian project. It was called Projeto Natal. It was developed by a guy in Ireland, I can't remember. And he designed the idea of Kinect. He produced the idea of Kinect. And then Microsoft discovered the idea, saw the product, and bought the whole company. And the guy started to work for Microsoft. The Microsoft rebranded the product and launched it as Kinect, part of Xbox 360. Okay, so it's actually a Brazilian project, very important. So the exergame terminology actually seems to have emerged, happened back in 1998 because of Dance Revolution. Before that, there was no actual terminology to indicate what kind of game you're talking about when you want to mix movement, exercise, and video games. So the exergame technology became existent back in 1998 and kind of popular back in 2000. But the definitions I found in those periods of time was very limiting, and I'll show you why the very first definitions were all wrong. First of all, what are exergames? Games that combine play and exercise. The use of video games in an exercise activity and the combination of gaming technologies and exercise routines motivate physical activity among individuals or groups. Why these definitions are limited? Because if you consider sports sciences, where people study all kinds of movements, you see that physical activity is a biggest concept. Among that, you have exercise, which is one kind of activity. And among physical exercise, you have one particular way of doing those exercise, which is training. Okay? So physical activity is any body movement produced by skeletal muscles that results in energy expenditure, which is very important because that helps fight against sedentary. Okay, so this is a simple but very important difference among physical activity as a whole and exercise as one kind of activity. Planned, structured, repetitive, and purposed. So you have to understand the difference between these two. So physical activity, in fact, are divided in many other ways of doing movement exercise. Let's go. Sorry. Many other movements. You have ambulation, when you include walking, daily life activities, household activities, kitchen activities, self-care activities, transitional activities, and transportation and exercise. So once more, if you associate the idea of exergame with exercise, you're actually saying just one kind of activity can be considered exergame. You're missing the whole idea, the whole point of energy expenditure. For instance, I want to stress that ambulation includes walking. So if you associate exergame with exercise, walking is not possible. Not an example. So you say Pokemon Go, which is basically an exergame that makes you walk to different Pokestops and things like that. You say no, Pokemon Go is not a kind of exergame. But in fact, it is a very, very good example of exergame that asks you to do one specific physical activity, which is walking. So you have to understand that breathing can be a kind of exercise, a kind of physical activity, which can be associated to a exergame.
grabbing objects, for instance, getting dressed, sitting down, sitting up, doing this kind of very simple exercise, cycling, and playing virtual sports, e-sports. They all examples of actually doing exergaming. So exergaming is not just exercise. Exergaming is compliant of a lot of many other activities. So a better definition would be exergame is a video game that promotes, either by using or requiring sensing, players' physical movement, which in fact brings the idea of exertion. Exertion is a word in English that says you're doing some energy expenditure. So that's the main difference. So games that require players' movement, exertion, that is generally more than sedentary and includes strength, balance, and flexibility activity. This is a much better definition of exergaming than the former ones. If you understand that, if you agree with that, you see that exergaming can be used to obtain many physical benefits, like treating hypertension, obesity, diabetes, gait, stroke, walking capacity, balance, risk of falling, sedentary behavior, osteoporosis, fibromyalgia, sarcopenia, muscle strength, motor coordination, proprioception, laterality, and many other activities can be somehow associated, trained, can be stimulated by exergaming, because all of them involve all kinds of movements, okay? But still, I say exergaming is not just physical exertion, because body and mind are not that separated. Previous definition stressed the idea that you're moving and your body has to interface with the system. But what I argue is that you cannot separate body and mind. And because of that, you have to understand the different definition of exergaming. And why I say that body and mind are not that separate? Because there are some evidences. For instance, dual task is a kind of activity that were demanded by physiotherapy, for instance, where you combine body and mind training. And it has been proved that if you do a combined body and mind activity, it's much better than doing that activity separated. It's been proved that it's better to work together than doing those separately. This is the first argument. The second argument, some exercise can produce a very interesting perception from the person who is doing the exercise. There is one which is known as runner's high. For those that do marathons and long runnings, joggings, after some time, you feel an urge, adrenaline surge that keeps you running. So your exercise affects your mood, okay? So this mood change also affects your sensibility to pain. So you do an exercise, you actually managing your sensibility to pain. So two kind of very different sensations. There's a theory called guided plasticity facilitation framework, which says acute physical exercise is assumed to enhance brain metabolism and promote neuroplastic processes, where these changes in brain plasticity are guided by cognitive stimulation. In short, if you do a very intense exercise, you produce new cells and new connections in your brain, and those connections can be hijacked by cognitive capacities. Okay. So it's a very interesting and important. There is also another argument which is related to this condition called synesthesia. Synesthesia is a sensorial condition. It comes from the neuroscience studies. It's a condition when people make confusion or sense two sensitive situations as one thing. So one sense triggers experience in another. In sense for this kind of area for neurosciences are tactile, visual, auditive, taste, and smell, which are they all well-known 5 senses, but also proprioceptive, vestibular, interoperative, which is kind of related to emotion. So what this condition says is that you have a stimuli in one area and it's filled in the other. So there are kind of people that see colored numbers or see sound with numbers and feel words with some personalities, this kind of confusion. This is a actual condition. It's a medical condition. It's as it is. There's no cure, but it proves that all senses are interconnected somehow. Okay, so they all wired in our brains somehow that you can actually stimulate one and obtain results from the other. So body and mind are very connected, which is called embodied cognition, which is a concept from a little bit further from synesthesia. Synesthesia says that we can mix all the senses, but here the idea is that your body, your limbs, and all your yourself are all interconnected. You are a whole. Okay, so that kind of understanding said that learning emerges from physical and affective interaction with the environment. So memories, for instance, as an example, and concepts are better recalled when imprinted with sensory experiences during learning. So if you involve the learner in a more emotional or physical activity while understanding some concept, some abstract concept, that understanding becomes more strengthened in the brain. Okay, so you cannot separate the two things, cognition and body experiences. The last argument I showed, this relationship between body and mind, is an area of study, recently recognized in Brazil, which is psychomotricity. Psychomotricity is an area that says that development happens as a motor, cognitive, and emotional integrated way. So you learn, you develop. The learning is related to embodied cognition. Now I'm saying you can develop one of the areas, one of the 3 areas, and when you do that, you obtain results in other areas of yourself. Okay, so one dimension, if you stimulate one dimension, you can leverage the others. If you stimulate motor coordination, you can obtain a better cognition and vice versa. So if you agree with these arguments, you see that my definition of exergames not related to exertion as a body movement alone. Exergames are games with body and mind exertion. Some kind of you have to struggle a little bit with the cognition, and you have to struggle a little bit with the movement. Exergame is a game that promotes players' mental exertion altogether with physical exertion that is more than sedentary and includes endurance, control, coordination, speed, strength, balance, and flexibility activities. So for me, exergames is a whole bunch of possibilities involving body and mind, not just body, not just mind exertion activities, but those all together. And if you agree with me, you see that we will be able to obtain many more benefits, which are some of them related to conceptions, so abstract feelings and cognition, like motivation, relaxation, attention, concentration, executive functions, dementia, pain relief, autism, attention disorder, Down syndrome, social isolation, anxiety, sleep disorder, depression, and many other benefits that involve physical and body response. So that's why I pretty much believe on the power of exergames, because they can bring many benefits to a player. So that's the very first bit of my presentation. Now I talk about designing. Okay, I understand the whole picture of exergaming, but how to design a game to achieve that kind of expectation. First of all, it is a game, so it has to be interesting, engaging, appealing. It has to be fun somehow. It has all the elements of a conventional game, but also you have to figure out the relationship between body and mind. For instance, we'll see that the basic idea of managing, balancing the skills of the player and the difficulty of the game, which is called the flow channel. We all, when design the game, we try to keep the player in this flow channel to keep the player feeling enjoyable, feel involved, engaged, etc. That model is from the 70s by Csikszentmihalyi, which is a psychologist working on happiness. So he related this kind of feeling, the happiness, with all the characteristics of a game. But now, this is not enough, because you have not just some cognitive aspects, you have movement, you have body aspects. So in 2007, it appeared a proposal with a dual flow, where you have actually the basic Csikszentmihalyi flow, and also another, it's all the other way around, and also a attempt to balance the game difficulty with exercise, with movement difficulties. So you have in one side the actual physical, and the other side the actual cognition aspect of the game. So you have to, when you design the game, you have to think about those two dimensions. This one, I tell you, is a little bit limiting, because the physical dimension and the psychic dimension can also interact among themselves. So thinking of balancing all the dimensions of producing a exergame actually needs to think in 3 dimensions. And instead of channels, you have volumes. You have mixing them all together. Okay, so it became a cylinder when you have to balance all 3 dimensions: the difficulty, psychic performance, and therapeutic or motor performance as well. Okay, that is Claudinet's doctoral idea. Also, when we think about exergame, we usually have some kind of sensing. We saw that in biking, we saw that in surfaces, in gloves and whatever. Designing games with all those devices is also a non-trivial task compared to a usual game. Okay, and why? Because some of the channels, when you interact with so many devices, are purposeful. You do it on purpose, but some of them are sensing, where you have unconscious actions, like you start to sweat, you start to pump your heart a little bit more faster. Some inputs you cannot control. You can control how you read something, how you move left and right, and front and back, but your heart rate, you do not control it directly. Okay, but you can use all this information to adjust your game in order to achieve that three-dimensional flow. You have to consider all the possibilities. Okay, so you actually have all these inputs. You then mix them together. You can stress one input on behalf on the idea of well, the movement is much more important than your oximetry, for instance, or the other way around. I want to control the game basically by my heart rate, then on measuring my movement. You can mix the way you want, and by those mixes, you can control the elements of the games, the mechanics of the game, the dynamics of the game, and even the aesthetics of the game. And then the player will see that and react to this kind of information. So it's not trivial. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying that designing exergames is not a trivial task. Simple games are not simple. It's not trivial. And then you can imagine if you add three-dimensional flow, you can add devices and all the idea behind the exergame. So it becomes a not trivial task even further. One way and one important thing you have to do is to consider that now the game as an artifact for a professional, you must give the player some kind of feedback, but also the professional, you're able to give the professional some kind of information about the process as well. Okay, so the scoring system needs to be a little bit more stronger than usually is. So experts want to interact with biomedical device. Those biomedical devices are manipulated by the patient that produce some kind of scoring in the game. And this scoring comes back to the player to motivate the player, and also can be used as an index, as a metric for some aspect you want to achieve with the game. If you do that, you have a game that is motivated to the player and also useful to the professional, to the therapeutic professional who is dealing with the game. So the use of both cognitive and motor target inputs as part of the scoring system will give you the capacity to compare the game with the gold standards that are existent in all the therapeutic approaches in physiotherapy, cognitive therapy, and respiratory cognitive. Once you can measure what is going on with all the inputs, you can compare with existing metrics, golden used metrics, which are very important in the. There are some ways you can design these interactions with all this information. You can use a deterministic rule-based thresholding. So if the game is able to measure, the game can also understand that for some reason you becoming closer to a threshold where the game should stop because it's demanding too much, either in the cognitive or in the motor demand on the gamer. So the game can be constantly measuring these elements and adjusting the difficulty of the game, cognitive difficulty and the motor demand continuously, but in a deterministic way. This is called mode. It's a paper from Emmanuel. But a better way to do that is to apply some kind of artificial intelligence, because sometimes the three dimensions are somehow conflicting. You sometimes you want to produce a better demand on the cognitive, but the body cannot respond to that demand in the terms of physical activity. And the other way around can happen as well. So you leave that to an artificial intelligence and you design all the rules and leave the intelligence to manage. Because if the system decides to ask for a bit more of cognitive challenges, it could be too much. In the next interaction, the cognitive demand can be lowered and the motor demand can be strengthened so it keeps the balance by itself. That's the main idea of a deep machine learning with dynamic difficulty adjustment. So a better flow theory, multimodal input, scoring system, and balancing reasoning result in an exergame that is actually entertaining to patient and useful to professionals. That's my understanding, that's my hope for exergaming. The last bit of my talk is about, once you agree with the definition, once you see that designing has some particularities, then what you can do with that? You can achieve exergames for physical activity, motor rehabilitation, cognitive rehabilitation, health monitoring, screening. What is a screening? You can ask a person to play a game, and that game can alert, but that person might have autism. That person might have impulsive behaviors. That person might have attention disorder. So you can use the game for screening possibilities of divergent behavior with the game. You can also test, you can produce a very systematic kind of game, very narrow flow channel, and ask a person to play. And if it falls out of the mainstream, well, you can issue a index or metric and compare to gold standard metrics. You can also do prognosis. If you see someone playing a game in a kind of specific way, you can actually plan how to stress their deficits. So if the person is doing very badly on the motor side of the game, then the game can be planned to stress the motor actions instead of the cognitive actions, challenges. Okay, so you can plan how to. We have been doing some experiments with all these ideas. So we have motor coordination and literacy for Down syndrome. That's the origin of ovulitando. You can stress both dimensions. We've done some experiments with balancing, dynamic balancing, static balancing with CERTAT. There is also a immersive version of CERTAT. So you experiment with static balancing in a virtual reality head-mounted display. You can test your capabilities in terms of laterality and your visual motor coordination. So the understanding of your body size and how you react to the environment. We've been playing a lot with interactive floor, with Cartea, mixing kinesthesia, which is not synesthesia, different from the one I've shown you before. This one is the ability to manage how some objects that are coming towards you and how you respond and when you should respond to that stimuli. Hepatia, so mixing working memory, movement, self-esteem, inhibitory control. And this one, I think it's not known by most of you. We developed a static chair with a strain gauge sensor. So the stroke patient sit on that. We strap their limbs, lower limbs to the chair, and it starts to strength exercise. And the strength is actually controlling the height of a racket. And this is a well-known Pong game, but you're playing with yourself because the strength you do here controls either the left one and the right one rackets. Okay, that's why we called Ming Pong. It's a Pong with myself, controlled by your strength. This is the doctoral work of Fabrizio, which won the best prize in the Boston Scientific International in 2019. The Zen breath, so you can do your exercise considering the breathing of the player in order to achieve relaxation, meditation status. Also, I blew it, which is also towards respiratory rehabilitation. So you have your device. You can also have other devices as unconscious inputs, and you manage all this information and produce a physiotherapy plan according to the need. If you're an asthmatic or cystic fibrosis patient, you can manage all the elements of the game in order to stimulate what you need to stimulate. So, coming to the end, the future, and what I see is that we will have some basic discipline subject in many undergrad courses where people have to study how to select an exergame and their hardware setup to stimulate people with physical and mental specific needs and its prescription regimen. In short, I see that exergame will be some kind of medicine. People will prescribe exergames in the future. Okay, that's my hope and what I believe in. And that's it. Thank you very much.